Hal Jackson pushed open the heavy glass doors of Ironclad Fitness Club before the sun had fully risen, his breath catching in the chill morning air. The lobby's polished tile floor reflected the glow of the overhead lights, and the faint hum of the HVAC system mingled with the distant clank of weights echoing through the corridors. He shook the dew from his windbreaker and hung it on the row of hooks near the reception desk, where the night shift attendant smiled a sleepy greeting. At 68 years old, he still moved with the grace of the athlete he once was, a world champion powerlifter, but he'd learned not to mention his past. Today, as always, he carried only his gym bag and a quiet confidence born of decades of early morning workouts. Hal padded through the locker room, each step falling silent on the rubber mats. He passed under the row of vinyl lockers lined up like sentinels and dipped into the men's changing area, its benches humming with fluorescent light and the faint scent of rubber mats and sanitizing spray. Pulling off his windbreaker and folding it neatly, he changed into his trademark gray tee and navy shorts, the fabric soft from years of washes. He dipped into the shower stall for a quick rinse, lukewarm jets that washed away the road grime, and toweled off before returning to the main gym floor. He moved with purpose down the broad aisle that led to the cardio machines, nodding to the occasional early bird member on the elliptical. The treadmills were already humming beneath a handful of dedicated runners, and the rowers in the corner pumped with rhythmic urgency. Hal always started with a light jog, a gentle 5 minutes, to warm his muscles before tackling his favorite part of the workout, the free weights. But today, as he approached the racks of dumbbells and barbells, he saw Selena Park, the facility manager, standing with her arms folded. Her name tag caught the light, Selena Park, manager. Under her crisp polo and professional composure, Hal could sense a tension he hadn't encountered before. "Good morning, Hal," she said, voice polite but firm. "I need to talk to you about the free weight area." Hal paused, heart flickering. He'd never once had an issue here. Ironclad prided itself on inclusivity. "Morning, Selena," he replied, unclipping his earbuds. "Everything all right?" Selena pulled a laminated poster from behind the counter, bright lettering announcing a new weight room reservation policy. She held it out, her lips pressed together. "We've had a lot of traffic," she began, eyes flicking to a handful of younger members hovering near the benches. Management decided that during peak hours, ages 18 to 65 have priority in the free weight area. Seniors are welcome at off-peak times, or you can use the machines at any time. She tapped the sign. "I'm sorry, Hal, but I need to enforce that rule." Hal's chest tightened around a sudden ache. "Off-peak?" His voice came out quieter than intended, edged with hurt. "It's not even 7 o'clock. He gestured to the clock on the far wall, 6:52 a.m. "I'm here every morning before dawn." "You've never had a problem." Selena's brow softened, but her stance remained resolute. "I know you've been loyal since we opened," she said, "but we can't make exceptions. The youth programs sign up for bench times, and we promised them fairness." A jolt of indignation surged through Hal. He remembered the promise he'd made himself, to stay strong, to prove that age couldn't tarnish ability. Yet here he was, confronted with a barrier erected not by his own fading strength, but by a policy that didn't know his name. He coughed against the sudden sharpness in his throat. "Thank you for letting me know," he said, voice clipped. "I'll adjust my schedule." Selena glanced at him, regret flickering behind her eyes. "You're always welcome in cardio," she offered, "or in the studio for stretching." She tried to smile. "We've got a bench pressing class that starts at 9 if you'd like to join." Hal nodded once, stiffly. He turned away, the weight of her apology sobering. As he walked toward the row of stationary bikes, their resistance set for lighter loads, he felt every eye in the weight room follow his retreat, curiosity and sympathy mingling in their stares. Mounting the bike, he clipped his feet into the pedals and began to cycle, legs pumping in measured revolutions while his mind replayed the moment. A trickle of heat rose through him, not from exertion but from a simmering determination. He remembered the roar of the crowd at the World Masters Powerlifting Championship, the bar bending beneath twice his body weight, the sense of invincibility that had once defined him. He would not be sidelined by arbitrary limits now. Finishing his steady 10-minute warm-up, Hal snapped off the bike's display and swung his legs to the floor. He unstrapped his water bottle and took a long drink, eyes narrowing as the decision solidified in his chest. He wheeled his bag toward the door, ignoring the rows of cardio machines, and headed instead to the side entrance that led out to the parking lot. Outside, the sky had lightened to a rosy hue and the world seemed to hold its breath before dawn. He exhaled, warmed by resolve. If Ironclad would not recognize his strength, he would find or build a place that did. And tomorrow, he vowed, he would return to the weight room on his own terms. When Hal Jackson stepped through the door of his little bungalow, the late morning sunlight found dust motes drifting in the air, dancing above the scattering of workout gear, piled in the corner. He hung his windbreaker on the hook by the entrance and set his gym bag down with a soft thud, the echo reverberating through the empty room. The sting of Selena Park's words, "off-peak hours only," still pulsed in his mind. But he knew there was more to himself than the chronometer on Ironclad's front desk. He brushed past the worn sofa and crossed the narrow living room, each footstep stirring up memory. In the corner near the window sat an old metal filing cabinet, its paint chipped to reveal bare steel. Hal knelt and pulled open the bottom drawer, where a battered shoebox rested beneath a stack of tax returns. He lifted it out gently, as if cradling a newborn, and set it on the coffee table. The lid came off with a soft scrape, and there, nestled in faded velvet, lay his trophies: a tarnished brass plaque from the 1980 Southeast Regional, a silver-rimmed medal from the state championships, and at the bottom, the gleaming gold disc he had forgotten until that morning. The edges of the medal caught the sunlight, flaring like a beacon in a dusty room. He cupped the medal in his weathered palm and turned it over, reading the engraved letters. 1980 World Masters Powerlifting Champion. Men's 75 plus Kiyu. The flash of memory was immediate. He was back in the cavernous hall of the global sports arena, the roar of thousands washing over him as he chalked his hands. He could still feel the rough texture of the barbell, loaded impossibly high, the bar bending under weight that should have crushed mortal bones. He remembered the hush that fell when he bent to lift, the split second when the world held its breath, and then the thunderous eruption of applause as he locked his knees and straightened his hips. The gold medal had felt impossibly heavy around his neck, a tangible proof that age was no barrier to strength. Hal placed the medal around his neck again in the quiet of his living room, imagining the flashbulbs, the announcer's booming voice, the upturned faces of his coach and fellow competitors. He lifted his shirt and found the faint scar on his torso where he'd torn a muscle during a deadlift, an injury that nearly ended his career. He traced the scar with a fingertip and remembered the months of rehab, the hours of physical therapy, when he had learned to walk again before dreaming of lifting. And he remembered the promise he'd made himself, that no policy, no dismissal, would ever make him doubt his own worth. Folding the shirt back down, Hal stood and moved to the kitchen, where a kettle hissed over the stove. He filled a chipped mug with steaming water and stirred an instant coffee, the rich aroma filling the room. He carried the mug back to the table, spreading out the contents of the shoebox like sacred relics. Next to the medals lay faded photos, himself in a cotton tank top and lifting belt, flanked by his coach Ed Turner, broad-shouldered with a toothy grin, and a dozen lifted barbells like glimmering steel puzzles. In another shot, he stood on a podium with two young rivals, arms raised, the flags of competing nations waving behind them. He let his finger linger on each image, as if reading a cherished book. He picked up a photograph of his younger self in the locker room, arms wrapped around a fellow lifter's shoulders. The two of them wore identical expressions of triumph, eyes alight with the knowledge that they had pushed the human body to its very limits. The photo had been taken moments after he'd set the new world record, 297.5 kilograms on the deadlift. In that snapshot, the years peeled away. He was not the man brushed aside by a gym policy, but the champion who had once held the world in his grasp. Hal closed the shoebox, feelings coiling tighter in his chest. He tucked it under his arm and strode to the front door, the mug of coffee still warm in his other hand. The humid hush of the morning pressed against the threshold as he slipped outside and locked the door behind him. He paused on the front porch, coffee in hand, and raised the mug in silent salute to the medals that lay waiting. The neighborhood was waking, mail trucks rattling, sprinklers sputtering, but Hal saw only the road ahead. Tomorrow, he would return to Ironclad Fitness. He would not ask permission. He would show them what 68 years of sculpted discipline could achieve. The medals in his bag would speak louder than any policy sign ever could. As he took a long swallow of coffee, the bitter heat grounded him in the present. Champion, elder, man defined not by age, but by the strength that refused to fade. And with that final sip, he set off down the sidewalk into the gold blush of morning, every step powered by the legacy he carried, and the promise he intended to fulfill. Hal pushed open the battered garage door with a soft grunt, and the familiar scent of sawdust and engine oil greeted him like an old friend. Sunlight slanted through the single grimy window, illuminating the motley collection of makeshift equipment he'd cobbled together. Two 5-gallon buckets, filled with concrete and capped by broom handles. A length of rebar wedged between cinder blocks and a pair of kettlebells whose cast iron surfaces were worn smooth by years of use. He set his gym bag on the workbench and unzipped it, pulling out a sweat-stained towel and a well-thumbed notebook filled with workout logs dating back decades. He began with a series of body-weight warm-ups, leg swings to loosen a stubborn hip, slow windmills to stretch his shoulders, each movement deliberate and precise. Then, he moved to the buckets, lining them up like old sparring partners. His hands, thick with calluses, gripped the broom handle as he hoisted the contraption to chest height. The bar wobbled under the uneven weight, forcing his core to engage in a battle for balance. He pressed upward in a smooth, controlled motion. 1, 2, 3 seconds to lock out, then lowered back down. Each rep felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. Outside, the neighborhood stirred. Through the open door, he heard the screech of bicycle tires and the bark of Mrs. Alvarez's old terrier. After the third set, he reached for his notebook and scrawled, "Conical presses, 3x8-ish bodyweight plus homemade buckets," before sipping water from a chipped tin mug. The concrete dust clung to his shirt, a badge of tenacity. Suddenly, the garage door rattled. Hal looked up to see Maria Romero standing on the threshold, her aerobics outfit incongruous amid the clang of homemade barbells. She carried a coil of resistance bands and a carton of homemade protein shakes. "I thought you might need these," she said, smiling broadly, despite the uneven rows of her teeth. "One shake for after your workout, and these bands for added pull-up assistance." Hal's chest warmed. Maria had always been more than a friend. She was the spark that reignited his passion for movement. He waved her inside and set the bands on the bench. "I got tired of waiting for off-peak," he said, voice rough. "I'm building my own gym here." Maria's eyes lit up as she tucked a band around the broom handle barbell. "Let's see if we can up the ante," she said, looping another band under one bucket and over the handle to provide variable resistance, thickening the tension at the top of each press. She offered him the first rep. Hal braced, pressed upward, and felt the band's taut resistance add a new dimension to the lift. His muscles screamed in the best possible way. They moved through a circuit Maria had designed. Band-assisted chin-ups on the overhead beam, static holds with the buckets, single-leg deadlifts using the kettlebells. Maria counted each repetition, her voice a steady metronome. Between sets, she handed him a cherry vanilla shake she'd blended that morning. "High protein, low sugar," she said. "Good for repair." Hal tipped the mug to his lips, feeling the sweet thickness slide down his throat like a promise. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, shadows stretched across the garage floor. Neighbors paused at their fences to watch the unlikely duo at work, a white aerobics instructor urging a silver-haired champion to greater feats. Word traveled fast. A few curious passers-by stopped to ask if they could join. Inexperienced teens wanting tips on form, a retired firefighter seeking to regain mobility. Hal welcomed them, sharing the makeshift equipment and guiding them through bodyweight regressions of his own pressing routine. By twilight, the garage had transformed into a small community gym. Maria led a cool down of gentle stretches and breathing exercises, her arms guiding shoulders and hips through tension-releasing arcs. Hal closed his eyes at the stretch in his lower back, absorbing the camaraderie of collective effort. He glanced at his notebook, now brimming with new entries. Resistance band presses, 4x6. Assisted chin-ups, 3x failure. Community circuit, 5 participants. The final line he added in bold, "Reclaiming my strength and my pride." As Marie Sheng packed up her gear, Hal clapped her on the shoulder. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. "I needed this." She smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "Tomorrow," she replied, "we add pull-throughs and a mobility station for seniors." Hal laughed, the sound rich with possibility. "Lead the way," he said. That night, as he lay in bed, the ache in his muscles sang of battle won. He drifted off replaying the morning's refusal at Ironclad and the day's triumph in his own backyard gym. In his dreams, he saw himself striding back through those fitness club doors, shoebox in hand, medals gleaming, undaunted, undeniable, and ready to lift more than just weights. Hal stepped through the gym's front doors exactly at 6:15 the next morning, the same time he'd been turned away the week before. He paused in the lobby under the banner proclaiming peak hours, ages 18 to 65, then squared his shoulders and walked past the treadmill cluster, nodding a silent greeting to the receptionist, who barely glanced up from her tablet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the polished rubber floor. Hal's heart thrummed in his chest, not with nerves this time, but with the steady beat of resolve. He strode past rows of cardio machines and into the free weight area, where the racks of dumbbells gleamed like silent challengers. A small group of younger members was clustered around the bench press, their conversation pausing as he passed. Each set of eyes flicked to the silver streak in his hair, the lean lines of muscle in his forearms. At the squat rack in the corner stood Selena Park, clipboard in hand, her professional smile taut with surprise. She closed the rack's bar hook and crossed her arms. "Mr. Jackson," she said, voice polite but firm, "what are you doing here?" He picked up a weightlifting belt from his gym bag and buckled it around his waist. "I'm here to demonstrate why I belong," he replied, calm but unwavering. He moved to the empty bench press beside them, the very bench he'd been barred from using, and set down his small duffel bag. Selena's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Hal unzipped his bag and withdrew a small stack of paper plates, each labeled with his name and the weight he'd hoisted in competition. 325 lbs, 355 lbs, 385 lbs. He placed them on the floor beside the rack. A dozen heads turned as he loaded the barbell. One 45-pound plate, another, then a 25 on each side. The younger lifters leaned in, curiosity rippling through them. Selena's grip on her clipboard tightened. He lay back on the bench, legs planted firmly, feet braced against the floor. His fingers traced the cold steel of the barbell, chalk dust puffing around his hands. He inhaled deeply, feeling the old adrenaline surge. He squeezed the bar and unracked it, the weight tilting forward before he locked his arms. 10 seconds later, he pressed it to full extension, his elbows snapping into place. He lowered it in a smooth arc, 1, 2, then locked out again. 2 more reps, then a third. Not his championship weight, but more than many younger members handled. He racked the bar with a confident clang. A hush fell. Selena stepped forward, lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. One of the younger lifters, biceps rippling under a sleeveless shirt, clapped slowly, a sound that spread into genuine applause. Others joined in, some whistling low, impressed. Hal rose, chest heaving, chalk dust settling like mist around him. He approached Selena, straightened his shirt. "That was 185 pounds, he said quietly. "At 68. He glanced at the dangling paper plates. "I'll graduate to 205 next week." The unspoken question hung. Would she still enforce the age policy? Selena inhaled, her professional mask slipping to reveal human astonishment. She tapped her clipboard, then tore off the top page. "I apologize," she said, voice unsteady. "Then I was wrong." She handed him the page, an official revision signed by the gym's director. Effective immediately. Age restrictions removed from free weights. All members cleared for use as able. Hal's chest tightened with relief. He squeezed the page, nodded once, and walked back to the weights. The younger members made way, offering respectful smiles. He placed his homemade paper plate tags beside the bench and began loading the bar again, this time for deadlifts. Plates clanged as he stacked them. 2 45s, a pair of 25s, then another pair of 10s. He positioned himself, chalked his hands, and lifted. His back straightened, hips thrust forward, and the bar rose in a single powerful motion. He held it at lockout for a moment before lowering 1, 2, 3 precise reps that drew another ripple of applause. All around him, the gym's midday energy shifted. Selena organized for a second bar to be loaded with lighter plates for senior members, who now felt welcome. One of the trainers approached Hal, jotting down notes to incorporate his demonstration into a new active aging strength program. Members gathered in small clusters, asking Hal about his technique, his training tips, his years of competition. Hal set down the bar and began to unpack his duffel. He withdrew concrete-filled buckets and broomstick barbells for his makeshift routine, nodding to Maria standing at the squat rack with her resistance bands. She grinned and waved, ready to join him. Selena approached Hal again, this time with a respectful smile. "Would you consider coaching our seniors clinic? Your insight would be invaluable." Hal placed a worn hand on her shoulder. "I'd be honored." He stepped away, lifting his buckets onto the floor beside the barbell. As he chalked his hands, Maria adjusted the bands beneath the handle. Around them, Ironclad's weight room resonated not with exclusion, but with shared energy, a testament to the man who refused to be defined by age, and the gym that learned to recognize true strength. Hal arrived at Ironclad a full hour before the first active aging strength session was scheduled to begin. The weight room was quiet now, the echo of yesterday's clanging plates still humming in the air, like a distant promise. He carried a duffel bag filled with resistance bands, lightweight dumbbells, and a worn clipboard with the class roster. On one corner of the clipboard, he'd taped a small laminated photo of himself from the 1980 World Masters Powerlifting Championship. Proof, he thought, that strength transcends age. He set out the equipment in a neat semicircle around the squat rack. Bands draped over the hooks, dumbbells lined up by ascending weight, and a stack of foam mats for mobility drills. Beside it, he placed a large water jug and a bowl of individually wrapped protein bars Maria had made for him. The smell of latex from the bands mixed with the faint tang of iron from the dumbbells, creating the familiar aroma of potential. As he arranged the space, he reviewed the session plan in his mind. Gentle warm-ups, guided goblet squats, band-assisted deadlifts, and a closing balance routine that would ensure no one left feeling uncertain on their feet. At precisely 9 o'clock, the first participants trickled in. Mrs. Harding, who'd thrown her back in a gardening accident, Mr. Liu, a retired mail carrier with creaky knees, and two others who had heard through word of mouth. Their eyes brightened when they saw Hal standing ready in faded lifting shoes and a gray tee. He greeted each by name, offering a firm handshake or a warm nod. "Glad to see you," he said. "Let's begin with a simple march on the spot, knees up, arms swinging." He demonstrated, feet lifting slowly as he counted out the rhythm. As they followed, he moved among them, adjusting posture here, offering encouragement there. When the march turned into dynamic stretches, hip circles, shoulder rolls, Hal explained the purpose of each movement. Hip mobility eases lower back pressure. Shoulders need rotation to protect from injury. His voice was patient and clear, a far cry from the bark of a competition hall. After 10 minutes, he had guided them to the goblet squat station. He handed each person a light dumbbell and instructed, "Hold it close to your chest, feet shoulder width apart. Sit back into your heels like you're checking a chair." He demonstrated muscles coiling beneath his shirt. Some participants wobbled. Hal stepped forward to place a gentle hand on a shoulder or guide a back, his touch firm but reassuring. When Mrs. Harding executed her first squat with surprisingly steady knees, Hal offered a grin. "That's it, strong and safe." Midway through the session, Hal introduced the band-assisted deadlift. He looped a bright red band under a bucket squat stand and invited Mr. Liu to grasp the broom handlebar. "Pretend you're lifting the weight off the ground, then stand tall, no rounding the spine." He watched as Mr. Liu pulled, band resistance thickening at the top of the lift. When Liu hesitated, Hal crouched beside him and whispered, "Drive with the hips, not the back." The next rep was smoother, and the group broke into spontaneous applause. Hal felt a swell of pride. This was more than exercise. It was empowerment. After the strength work, he led them through a closing balance drill. Single-leg stands beside the bench, arms extended like tightrope walkers. The foam mats cushioned their feet, and the steady thump of music from the sound system set a calm backdrop. When the session ended, everyone gathered around the water jug. "How are we feeling?" Hal asked. "I can't believe I just did that." Mrs. Harding laughed, rubbing her knees. "I feel 10 years younger," Mr. Liu added, voice warm. Hal passed out protein bars and reminded them to hydrate, then offered his clipboard for feedback. What worked? What hurt? Their thoughtful answers. I loved the explanation of mechanics. "Next time, can we add light overhead presses?" Filled his page with ideas. As the group dispersed, Selena Parks stepped into the weight room with her own notepad. She'd come to observe the inaugural clinic and at last to meet the man who'd changed her perception of senior fitness. "That was impressive," she said, voice genuine. "I saw technique, encouragement, and results." Hal handed her the clipboard. "Your program ideas?" he asked. She nodded, scanning the feedback. "We'll integrate these clinics into our permanent schedule, and I'd like you to train our senior instructors." Across her lips was a sincere smile, the kind that bridged policy and people. Later that afternoon, Hal returned home to find a delivery at his doorstep. a framed certificate from Ironclad Fitness Club, honoring him as Senior Fitness Ambassador. He hung it above the shoebox of medals, the gold gleaming beside the new award. In his study, surrounded by trophies and photographs, he reflected on the day, how a policy meant to exclude had become an opportunity to build something even greater. He padded to the window and gazed at the early spring dusk settling over the neighborhood, content in the knowledge that strength, like the human spirit, only grows when it is shared.